Thank you everyone for joining our another edition of our Fireside Chat. We have Ms. Lidiya Dervisheva here from Next47. Thank you, Lidiya, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Perfect. Just a quick intro to Lidiya. She's a partner at Next47. She primarily works in robotics, AI, and mission vision, which I would love to get a little deeper into what that really means, but also in a broader perspective in the industrial and enterprise verticals. And she also supports due diligence, sourcing, and industry deep dives. She's particularly interested in startups that have a combination of both software and hardware to solve challenging problems in novel ways. So thank you, Lidiya, again for joining us. And I'd love to get a better idea of what you're doing at Next47, how you kind of came about, and what your journey has been so far in the VC space.
Sounds good. Yeah. Thanks, Mahesh. I'll get started. I'll give you first a little background on the fund, so you have an idea of what I do and what kind of our fund is focused on and what we're interested in. So Next47 is a fund sponsored by Siemens, so entirely funded by Siemens, and it was reset in 2017. It used to be a more traditional CVC before, and Siemens committed a new pool of money, €1 billion, $1.2 billion, in 2017 for the team to be completely independent and not to have to sync up any of their decisions with Siemens, with the business units, so to invest broadly in the B2B space. And what that means for us, we look at enterprise and we look at industrial tech and deep tech. Enterprise could be anything from SaaS, could be cyber or cloud. And then on the industrial tech, deep tech, that we divide in a couple of areas. That's where I spend a lot of my time. And those can be industry sectors like logistics and supply chain, transportation and mobility, energy, could be ag and food, could be also construction tech and prop tech, and anything also manufacturing related. So pretty broad, and that could mean robotics, hardware, that's only one side, but actually could be most of our investments are pure software. In fact, we do look for a software differentiation when we invest. Usually we lead rounds. Our check size is 5 to 35 million. And we invest across North America, Europe, and Israel. So pretty global. I work on global deals as well. Primarily, I'm based out of the Palo Alto office, but sometimes we collaborate across geographies. So we have an office in Berlin, in Munich, and in Tel Aviv, apart from the HQ in Palo Alto. The investor team is pretty small. So I'm a partner on the team. We're about 12 people globally. And then what we do, the way we add value to all these startups and the way we actually help leverage the connection to Siemens is post-investment. We have a whole go-to-market team, currently the same size as the investing team, about 13 people globally, but we're actually doubling that team. So the way it works is once you take money from our team, we basically plug in, but right as the investment is done, we plug in the go-to-market team, and that's the team that then connects you to Siemens, to the different business units for them to become a customer of the startup. Also leverages the Siemens brand, to reach to any of the Siemens network of customers, and that's really, really broad. Also on a global scale, has really far reach. And we also use the Siemens name to get access to anyone who you're trying to sell to. Which is why B2B works better for us. That's where we can add a lot more value. So we don't do anything in healthcare and we don't do anything in consumer. There's different teams on the healthcare side. Siemens has a healthcare team, but that's a separate entity, separate company actually, called Healthineers. And so that's that's about us. Very quickly on my background. So I'm originally from Bulgaria. In fact, I'm here today. I'm in Sofia, working remotely for 2 months and seeing family while also working full-time with my office in Palo Alto with my colleagues there. And my quick bio is I grew up here in Bulgaria, came to the US for college, did my bachelor in electrical engineering at Yale, and then got really interested in clean tech and impact and sustainability. My first job was in the commercial industrial energy efficiency side. I worked at a startup for 2 years. Then went back to school, did my MBA at Harvard, decided that I want to do something with technology and innovation, and I wasn't quite sure what that means. Like, would I join a startup, start a startup, or maybe invest in startups? And I ended up going the investing route. In fact, at the time, like 2015, 2016, I'm not sure if you followed, but clean tech was really kind of in a down cycle. No one was putting money in clean tech. It was kind of a clean tech winter, if you want to put it this way. And I ended up joining a former clean tech fund called Braemar Energy Ventures in New York, which had transitioned, had expanded their definition of clean tech and had started looking at industrial tech. And that's when I looked at, things like GetAround was my first deal, the peer-to-peer car sharing platform. So looking at, efficiency, kind of how do we leverage, how do we utilize assets, expanding, looking into logistics, looking into, material science, it kind of really broad industrial tech. So digitizing of traditional industries. For my first, I realized New York is really cool, but for my first job, I ended up going to Silicon Valley. That was always my dream, to be in the Bay Area. And I joined a fund that at the time, by the way, in the same way, had transitioned away from clean tech, a fund that was spinning out of Kleiner Perkins, out of their green growth fund. And I joined as the first junior, supporting 4 partners on the team, again, investing in the same areas: logistics, supply chain, manufacturing, transportation. And that was a team called G2 Venture Partners, G2VP. So I was with them for 2 years, and then in 2019 joined Next47. So that's the quick story. I cover primarily North America. So usually I used to be prior to COVID once a month on the East Coast, and then the rest of the time I live in San Francisco.
Got it.
And yeah, happy to chat to. Happy to be. Would love to answer any questions, Mahesh, on fundraising. So I start at the Series A. We invest in A to growth. So A, B, C, D is kind of the sweet spot.
Got it. And I guess a big part of today's conversation is how fundraising has changed during COVID, and we can see a lot of the activities that we're doing right now are on these type of platforms like Zoom. But from where you are standing as a partner at Next47, what is the state of fundraising ecosystem right now in 2021? How have things changed in the past year and a half since the pandemic? And are deals really getting done at the same pace, or are we back to normal? Are we still slow? What are your thoughts?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's a great time to be a founder and a very tough time to be an investor right now, is what kind of my general opinion. There's currently a lot of capital, not just in Silicon Valley, but on a global scale. There's also a lot of investors from the later stages, even hedge funds now, like Tiger and a couple others, coming in to do venture deals that never before were looked at. Those were, even growth investors that usually would do pre-IPO rounds are now coming in for Series B and C rounds, like for companies that, have 20, 30 folks and are just getting started, let's say, to do larger sales or kind of getting to first couple customers. So that's definitely has changed. Obviously, everything was very slow in the beginning of COVID, the first 2 quarters, but I would say it's accelerated last fall, and it really, really accelerated the last 6 months. We've been very, very busy. Even during the summer, we've seen a lot of deals. I just signed a deal, got a term sheet signed a week ago, and it's, even though it's August and many people are on vacation, people are still choosing it as a time to fundraise or to do kind of a preemptive rounds, or starting to think about, maybe many companies are now thinking about post Labor Day, kind of they see it as late Q3, early Q4 is kind of a sweet spot, and maybe that's also why it's now a great time to start thinking of what you should do in the next 3 to 6 months. And
are these deals, because of the current environment, are they taking longer to do, or are companies taking longer times to raise, or is it now that, as you mentioned, more global capital is coming in earlier stages, and even some early stage capital is going to later stage investments? Is that because there's more money out there? Is it faster to raise and faster to close deals?
Yeah, so we've seen in the A and B rounds, which are extremely competitive, the deals can get done for as fast as 2-3 weeks, which doesn't mean it's 2 weeks of you as a founder hanging out. It's 2 weeks of really hard work and asking all the investors are asking you questions. You're sharing a lot of information. Hopefully you have a lot of the materials prepared, and you're just answering additional questions, maybe connecting your investors to customers to do customer references. But yeah, fundraising has never been easy. It usually requires several conversations. It's easier if you have the relationships, if you have built them before, or maybe at the seed, you already have had folks, let's say, who couldn't get into the seed or who approached you right after you announced your seed and now are looking to get into your Series A. So if you have these pre-existing relationships, obviously that makes it easier, that makes it faster as well. Because meeting someone, at the moment you have started raising the A, and if that's the first meeting with a fund, you don't really have time to build a relationship. I mean, they could go fast, but then that's at a disadvantage both to them and to you, because it's someone you have not met yet. And at the Series A, that is a really, really important investor that you're adding to the cap table. So you should think of the Series A lead as kind of one of your most trusted advisors, and someone who will be on your board, somebody who will help you build the board, who will help build your initial traction. That it's a really, really important decision to pick who that investor and who that firm will be, not just in terms of brand, but also, do you get along with this person? Would they also support you as you go through not just the really good times, but also the hard times, or if you have to, go through firing people, like just having someone you can call and who will always be there to answer questions. So that's why if I'm in your shoes, I would really put a lot of effort of picking the right person to join your Series A board.
And how, again, since a lot of these companies are looking to raise Series A or in the process of raising Series A right now, how do you do that in a virtual environment? When you're trying to create that understanding of, is this person going to be there to support me in the long term? Are you able to have the same type of conversations that you would in person? I mean, obviously everyone has different personality when there's a screen in front of them versus in person. So how do you kind of determine that in the current in a virtual reality?
Right. So on one end, it's a two-sided sword kind of. And on one hand, you have your kind of the democratization of access because of Zoom, because you can be sitting anywhere in the world. You can call up an investor in Silicon Valley or get connected to an investor, and you can have that meeting without ever setting foot even in the United States, right? So that's incredible. And the fact that now this is being done and that investors are, it's very easy to get on these calls and to talk to anyone, that's definitely at your advantage. But that means it's the same for, levels the playing field. So that means not just people in Silicon Valley, but now you can be, the founders around the US now are getting access to those investors, right? And then on the other hand, you're still missing, as Mahesh said, you're still missing that personal touch, right? And that you really build true kind of memorable relationships when you meet someone face to face. So my advice is, in general, if you're able to, to show up, maybe even just meet an investor for coffee, whether hopefully it doesn't require traveling long, but if you're able to do that, I would always advise you to try. People are fairly comfortable doing outdoor, like going for coffee outdoors, doing a walk, whatever it takes. And if, let's say you're in an area, let's say you're not in Silicon Valley at the moment, but you're somewhere else, find the investors kind of within, let's say, driving distance of where you are. Like there probably will be some funds, and get to know them. And maybe they can also, once you build that relationship, those people can also introduce you then to, let's say, someone in Silicon Valley or some of the more prestigious firms, if that's your end goal. So my general advice is definitely leverage face-to-face meetings whenever you can, because also in a way that gives you an advantage when everyone else is kind of hiding in their home and you're the only one who's actually meeting investors and like showing up and, grabbing coffee with people. That, that puts you a step ahead. So as long as you're comfortable with it, of course. Right.
And I think there are now popping up different parts of the country, different parts of the world, other, quote unquote, smaller Silicon Valleys, right, where people have now moved away necessarily from Silicon Valley. Now they're living in different parts of the world and creating their own little ecosystems. And so I think access to those type of investors, especially to go meet someone in person, I think has become easier now. Not that everyone has to go to Silicon Valley or Boston or London. They've all moved into smaller, ecosystems now. So that access, I think, is definitely a little easier. But from a investor perspective, how are you working with other investors? And how is deal sharing happening? How are you keeping in touch with other investors who you usually would have if you're in Sandal Road, you just walk down and say, hey, what are you guys doing over there? How are you doing that now when you're in a virtual world?
Yeah, so there's obviously that still continues. Investors always talk to each other, and there's that's kind of a given for the industry. That's just how venture capital works. It is a very relationship driven world. In the venture capital, in fact, as an industry, is fairly small. Like if you think about the number of firms and the number of partners at those firms, it's really just a couple hundred people is the whole industry, maybe 1,000 or 2,000 in all of the US. So everyone kind of knows other people at other firms. For me, the most interesting ones are the kind of the upstream ones, who are upstream and downstream. So the people who invest right before me, so the people who do pre-seed and seed, and those are the folks I call up like every once in a while and ask them, hey, what are companies from your portfolio that are going to do an A? And that's also why like having the right seed investor who can put in front of Series A investors is very valuable. If you already have that, lucky you, you don't need to worry about, meeting a bunch of Series A investors, because your seed or angel investors already have that covered, and they'll make all these warm intros. So I would generally advise, don't reach out cold to investors. It's I don't personally like it that much. I don't think the conversion rate is that great, and it might take a bit longer to talk to a friend who talks to another friend who then makes the intro, but that's always preferable if the intro comes. The best is if the intro comes from a founder who that investor has already backed, right? So that's someone who the investor already trusted before. In fact, not just they trusted, but they invested in them. They have, a stake in that founder, in that founder's company. So that would be the best. If not, maybe the second best is through another investor who they're familiar with. Always keep in mind that the industry is small and people know each other. So once you know a couple of investors, maybe you then have some conversations who may, it might not be the right fit. It might be a firm that invests later stage. It might be that, their check size is not right, or whatever it is. It might be a bajillion things that they're not aligned for some reason. But always take the call and then ask that investor, hey, sorry, things didn't work out. We're not the right fit for you, but who in your network can I talk to? So each of these calls, think about it as that's potentially an intro to, one or two or five other folks, because there's people in Silicon Valley who are kind of like nodes. There are these investors who know like 100, 200 other people who they can literally reach out to. They reach out on a daily basis, who they send deals to. And if someone has been in the industry for 3-4 years, it's very, very natural for that person to be fairly well connected, just because of how the industry works. There's so many events and pre-COVID, like conferences and things we used to attend, happy hours, that now we have these relationships that now we kind of rely on even more so during COVID.
Great, which is my second question that was going to come to, around the networking aspect, which I think you just answered. So to just help a lot of the companies that are currently going through their pitches, a lot of these pitches are happening in these, Zooms and Microsoft Teams and other online platforms. What is your advice? What have you seen companies do really well in these virtual pitches, and what have you seen companies do not so well these virtual pitches, and they should kind of avoid to make it easier and have them having a better chance of actually getting that investment?
Yeah, I would say, first of all, it's good to send a teaser deck, or at least, a light version of the deck. So the investor, not everyone will do their homework, and, don't be upset if they haven't read all your slides. It happens, especially if it's an investor who's, trying to talk to 10 companies a week, and it is a lot of information. And then still, send the information beforehand, but don't expect them that they have read it. So still walk them through the deck. Be prepared. So the moment you start talking to investors, that means the round is live, right? Unless you're doing kind of just catch-ups that are much more casual. So for the casual catch-ups, no one expects you to have a deck. And for those, it's more build the relationship, tell them about your business, tell them about your milestones. Like, what do you plan to hit? When do you plan to raise? So those can be, catch-ups, they're mostly for building a relationship and preparing that fundraise to be more smooth, and also meeting the person and gaining their trust. If you're actually if the round is live, right, you're talking to investors, you kind of are running towards kind of a deadline. You also want all your investor conversations to move at about a similar pace, right? So to have your first call around, like, first, let's say 1 or 2 weeks, you're doing all your first calls, okay? And then you're doing all your second and third calls the following week, in the next 2 weeks, let's say. And it could be accelerated. But the thing is, if one of these investors, and that might not be your first choice, but one of these investors starts accelerating and starts moving faster than everyone else, and then you get a term sheet from them, but they're maybe your 5th choice and it's a no-name firm, like, but now you have a term sheet. And if you have a term sheet, you know, now you have that offer that you need to respond to, you need to tell your board. It becomes it's hard to say no to an offer, like that's actual, you know, money that's sitting there that you need to decide if you accept or not, and you still don't know how all the other conversations will pan out. So that's kind of the tricky part, is the timing of the round, to make sure that as you approach, you know, so if an investor is kind of trying to be too fast, you can always like slow them down a little bit, tell them, hey, like, let's have the next call in a little bit, or like, let's delay, you know, customer intros a little bit. So you can guide the process to make sure that everyone moves at about the same pace. So then you kind of expect all the term sheets to arrive no more than like a couple of days from each other, because each term sheet then will have at most like 5 days to a week of expiration, right? And that's when you need to, that's the time you have to negotiate the term sheet to this, or, you know, you can push term sheets and extend them, but honestly, I don't advise you to do that. If you can stay within, if it's a term sheet and you let it expire, it's kind of, it means you don't really want to work with that investor. So it already sends a bad sign to the investor. So the timing is really, really crucial. So once the round is live, like, it's up to you to make sure you align everybody on the same page, and you have all your initial like conversations teed up, you have all your materials prepared. So you have your, you know, your financial model, you have your, if you know, at least a light version of the financial model, your historic financials, any like sales pipeline, any, you know, any info on whether it's on the tech or, you know, basic info on the product roadmap, having, you know, making sure you know who's going to be on the call, like on a technical call, like, are you involving the CTO or head of product or head of engineering, just to make sure that all the people that are involved in the round, and your investors for sure will want to see like the technical side and understand more about what you're building. So you will be doing these calls as well. And then the other thing that's really, really important, and don't underestimate it, is customer intros. So only do the customer intros if it's an investor you're really, really serious about, and also they're really serious about you, because you're making, I mean, the customers are the most important asset you have, right? Especially at this early stage, it's really, these are your early partners. These are people who've trusted you and who've taken the bet on you. And so you also don't want to introduce them to, imagine you have 10 investors who all want to speak to customers, and you can't have a customer making 10 calls with 10 different people. So just be very careful how you stage them, and only maybe the 2-3 investors at the end who are the most serious and who are like ready to give or preparing for a term sheet, or, you know, kind of getting to those later stages, that you only to them you give those intros.
Got it. Now, I do want to be mindful of our time here. So just one last question for you, Lidiya, is what does the VC community believe is the future of fundraising? You know, where are we going with the fundraising? Are we going back to in person? Are we going to be doing roadshows again? Or is it, you know, do most investors prefer now this virtual environment and where they're seeing more pitches, you know, potentially more deal flow? You know, what is really the future that the companies can expect?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, for sure, more a combination of both, more a mix, and I think we'll keep seeing some virtual deals. What I think is kind of more interesting about the future of VC and the changes, even structural changes that are happening, is the fact that now we have a lot of solo venture capitalists. So the people who are running their own fund, maybe like a one-man, one-woman show, who've raised, let's say, 20 million. They're not part of these big firms, and they're able to move really fast. And they're usually it's people who do seed and pre-seed deals, but now they're starting to raise bigger funds. Maybe it's 2-3 people working together on a fund with, let's say, 50-60 million under management. So those are the teams that in many cases are kind of industry specific, or they'll have picked like a theme or a subsector that they invest in. If that falls within your theme, those folks that can be extremely helpful, because they're very targeted towards, let's say, an area that could be, prop tech, could be fintech, could be healthcare, whatever it is. They're very plugged into that. Usually a lot of their capital also comes from that industry. They can, connect you. The fact that you're working with someone who is like a domain expert of what you're doing can be extremely valuable. And also smaller funds can be a bit quicker to react, a bit more hands-on of, how they help you. And getting money from someone large like Andreessen or NEA, it's still, it's a great brand. And I'm not telling you to say no to a term sheet from them, but just be mindful that these are partners who probably have at least 10 other boards, maybe more, and you'll be, one of 10 commitments that they've already made. So just be mindful of, how busy, and that's valid for any fund, but be mindful of how busy the partner is who you're working with.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Lidiya. I think this has been very valuable for all the companies. But thank you, Lidiya, again for joining us.
Sounds good. Thank you.